Growing up, I had this friend Cliff in high school, and we always had a good time together, and we were known for doing lots of dumb things. That was kind of our big calling card, was we did dumb things together. I think I shared once that we went on a road trip to Arizona randomly with no purpose, and we drove to Arizona from California, got some chicken wings, and then came back over one night. And there was no real reason, but this one weekend we got the idea we're going to go camping. Right? This is going to be fun. We're going to go camping. We're maybe 16, 17 years old, and we're over at my house, and here's my mom and dad's garage, and we're just like, all right, we're going to go camping. Didn't really make any plans, by the way. So we get our car and we open the trunk and we like throw a couple sleeping bags in, and it's like, where's the tent? Okay, here's the tent. And as we're about to drive off, we grab like three things. My dad comes out and he's like, what are you guys doing? And we're like, we're going camping. And he's like, okay, do you have like any water? And we're like, oh, no, okay, all right, we'll get some water. So we start getting water, and then we're like, all right, let's go. And he said, well, wait, did you bring any food? And they're like, no, not really. And so we go get some food, and do you have a cooler to put it in? And this kind of thing happened over and over, where he kept on saying, did you remember this? Did you remember this? And we kept on like, okay. And like an hour and a half later, we're leaving. I remember being so annoyed with my dad that he was slowing us down when we wanted to go camping. And he did slow us down. But, looking back, we were so massively underprepared. I mean, it wasn't far. We probably would have survived, but we would have been probably sitting there with no food or water and no mat underneath us or anything. So it was smart for an adult to come in the room and tell us to slow down and do the things that we needed to get what we needed. It kind of reminds me of, they had a Disney movie they made maybe a decade ago now called Cars. And the lead character in that movie is Lightning McQueen. He's this fast young gun car. And there's this scene at the beginning where he's very fast and talented, where he's winning a race. And he has this pit crew who, are in charge of like putting new tires on after a few laps. And after a while, he's way ahead, and his pit crew start telling him, you need to stop and, let us set you up with new tires and give you oil and all this stuff so that you're not going to break down. And he's like, no, I'm not going to slow down. I just need to go. And of course, what happens, he goes a few more laps. He's winning. And suddenly a tire blows. And of course, he gets injured and is unable to win the race. But, what I was thinking about with you is how many of us are like that in our life, where we don't have enough time, we feel, or we tell ourselves, we don't have enough time to do what's good for us in one way or another. I think so many of us are like that, right? In one way or another. We know there are things we're neglecting in our life, but we just tell ourselves, I don't have enough time to take care of whatever this thing is. When I was in seminary, they gave us this thing called a wellness wheel, which is just a little graphic, which looks at wellness in your life, because they've discovered that healthy pastors are better pastors, so they're always pounding in our heads, you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And there's different pieces of this wellness wheel. There's like the emotional piece, there's the physical wellness, there's financial and social wellness, and then there's spiritual wellness. And as I've thought about this over my life in ministry and thought about other people, I don't know anyone who has a perfect wellness wheel, right? Most of us are really good at one thing or a few things, and then not so good at others. Maybe we're physically healthy, but emotionally maybe not all there. Maybe we have lots of money and we're healthy in that way, but our relationships are suffering. And as I think about the pieces of the wheel, maybe no piece in our society is more neglected than the spiritual component. Because of all the components on the wellness wheel, I think it's the hardest to see. And as our community, as our world gets more secularized, a lot of people don't even necessarily think that piece of the wellness wheel even matters. But there are signs of people, whatever piece of your wellness wheel isn't there or is suffering, you'll notice hunger in one way or another. It could be social or emotional, physical hunger. But in the spiritual side, you can have spiritual hunger too. And there's some different kinds of signs of spiritual hunger. One of those are feelings of meaninglessness, which, by the way, are in the rise in society as they've studied. Feelings of a lack of belonging. Feelings of immense guilt that you don't know how to get rid of, feelings of just the sense that life doesn't really come with all that much hope. So these can all be signs of spiritual hunger that we're hungry for. So I want to think about that as we think about the Transfiguration story. And as we think about it, so it's, this weird story where the disciples, a few of them, go up with Jesus on a mountain, and this crazy thing happens where his skin is shining and all this stuff, and they hear a voice from heaven and Elijah and Moses. But one of the things, as you think about that story with me, that it's worth noticing is how Jesus takes his disciples up there, and the disciples are mostly passive actors in this scenario. So in other words, almost nothing happens by their initiation. Almost everything happens to them, right? They show up on the mountain with Jesus. He takes them up there, and a cloud overshadows them. And then Moses and Elijah appear to them. And then a voice from heaven speaks to them. And then Jesus shines all over towards them. And the only thing they do in this story, two things, is they get afraid. And Peter says something dumb about they should build 3 tents for Jesus, Elijah, and Moses. Everything else is passive. It's being done to them. And I think one of the lessons of that, one of the takeaways, is that the transfiguration was not for Jesus, right? Jesus didn't need to be transfigured. God didn't need Jesus to be transfigured. They knew who they were. God knew what he was, that he was the Son. The people who needed the transfiguration were the disciples, right? So that they could get this mountaintop experience of clarity, of revelation, of who they are with, right? So Jesus and God in some way wanted them to have this important spiritual experience where they can see God for what he really is. And as we think about the wider story of Jesus, he was often himself going off to quiet places to pray, right? We have to assume to find some time alone with God. And when he teaches about prayer later in the Gospels, he says, when you pray, go find somewhere quiet, right? Just you and God, and go quiet. And so there's kind of this instruction from Jesus to go seek out spiritual experiences. Not spiritual theology or ideas, but experiences. And as I think about someone who grew up in the Lutheran tradition, and we're kind of part of this early Protestant tradition, I think that although there are many good things about Lutherans and traditions like us, we tend to be better at theology, that's to say beliefs, than we are at seeking experience. In fact, we're a little bit suspicious, right? When we see like Pentecostals, waving their hands and having a great time, we're like, it's not really for us. And maybe it's not, but there's something to be said for actually not just seeking ideas about God, but seeking experiences of God. Because I think sometimes, being able to brush up against the holy in one way or another, it has value in our life. I was actually reading about this, that so science has actually started to study experiences of the holy. They call them transcendent experiences. And social scientists have actually studied this kind of thing. They used to think it was totally fake, but as they've studied it, they could see actually this does real stuff to people. They define transcendent experiences as experiences where people, for some reason, it could be religious, it could be out in nature, it could be music, but it's an experience that brings people a sense of unity and belonging with all the things around them. It can be God, it can be humanity, it can be all of creation. So it's belonging. It's this thing where your sense of self kind of dissolves a little bit as you become part of the whole. It's this thing where it's timeless. In other words, when you're in that experience, you're not thinking of the minutes passing, right? It's this timeless experience, and it has all these effects on people. They did this study where they asked a bunch of college kids to go to this eucalyptus grove and look up for 1 minute at the beautiful canopy of trees. And so these kids did this, and then they studied what this did to them. After 1 minute, these kids reported that they had a stronger sense of satisfaction in life, that they felt more generous towards their neighbor, and that as they looked at their brains, these hormones that lead to human bonding and relationships actually started firing off, right? It made them more connected to their neighbor. They've studied this in other places too, and they found that when people have spiritual experiences or transcendent experiences, it actually breaks through negative thought cycles. It makes those kind of wash away. Most of us know what a negative thought cycle is, right? It's when you can't get away from this thought. Why did this thing happen? Why did that, what did that look mean? I'm not any good at this. No one that kind of stuff that can cycle in our mind. Transcendent experiences actually wash those kinds of things away and help us break those cycles. So here's a question for us to ponder. When was the last time that you experienced the holy, right? That you had a transcendent experience? And it's not just for like pastor types or Gandhi or Jesus to have these kinds of things. People do have transcendent experiences. If you talk to some of the kids from this congregation, they go off to Rainbow Trail Bible Camp, and they're with their brothers and sisters around their age and playing games and singing songs and campfires around beautiful nature, and they have transformational experiences, and they talk about how changed they are through that thing. I once met a guy who, as a child, was run over by a car, which isn't a transcendent experience, but he survived kind of miraculously. And I was hanging out with him, and I didn't know him that well, and he pulled out this piece of paper, and it was a 50-year-old news clipping about child gets run over by car, and it was about him. And it's something he carries around to remember how God is present in his life, this kind of transformational experience, probably one he doesn't even really remember, but it made a difference in his life. When I was post-college, had just graduated, I got the chance to go to Europe. And there's this place there called Taizé. They have some famous music, Taizé music, which we've sung before. And it's this spiritual community founded in the 40s, originally as this monk guy who wanted to save Jews from the Holocaust. But he eventually gathered this community of monks, except for they weren't Catholic monks. They were Protestant monks, so kind of unusual. And their big mission was to gather kids together and youth and just help them experience this beautiful kind of prayerful life through silence and music and prayer. And so they would gather you in these chapels when you go there, and they would read scripture in like 3 different languages. They would sing a few songs, and then after they would read the scripture, they would just have silence for like 8 minutes. And I'll tell you, 8 minutes may not sound long. It is so long when it's like, okay, now meditate in silence for 8 minutes. And me as a young guy, and actually me as today too, I mean, my brain, I was there like 6 or 7 days, and the first few days my brain was just going crazy during those 8 minutes, just all these thoughts, things I wanted to do, things I was wondering about, anxieties, boredom, all of it just racing through my mind. What was interesting, though, was each day that passed, it never got perfect, but you become able to kind of shut those things out, to acknowledge them, and then let them go. And by the end of it, I was actually enjoying the 8 minutes of silence and finding it as this prayerful time to experience the holy. And so I think God invites us to find these experiences one way or another, whether it's a walk in nature, whether it's, this is why we worship, to brush up against the holy, whether it's going to a camp, whatever it is, God wants us to find these experiences because, as we've been sharing, they make a difference in our lives. As you think about this, though, and we talked about how we have trouble making time for things, we may have an objection. And that objection may be something like this, that in my life, in my busy life, I don't have time to spend all my time, going kumbaya in nature, looking for God. I have too many things to do. I can't spend all my time on the mountaintop seeking spiritual experiences. And here's the thing, Jesus agrees with you, right? You don't have time in all your life to do this all the time. In fact, when Peter comes along, remember he makes that dumb suggestion, let's make dwelling places, right? Let's make 3 tents for you and Elijah and Moses. Let's stay here on the mountaintop. Jesus doesn't actually answer him. He ignores him, which is maybe the answer. But the answer is no, you can't stay on the mountaintop. You have to go back down into life. And so the call to the mountaintop is not the call to stay on the mountaintop. Nobody can do that. And if you tried to do it, you would be hiding from your real life. We go to the mountaintop for little bits of time. We have these experiences for little bits of time. We carve them out in our week so that when we're back down from the mountain, we remember that God is with us. And it's kind of like we talked about in the children's sermon. The point of the mountaintop is not that Jesus is only with us on the mountaintop. The point of the mountaintop is to remember that Jesus is always with us, and he's with us even when we're down there. But sometimes we need the mountaintop to remember that. And so this week, Jesus invites us to seek out our own transfigurations. Maybe not with, miraculous, glowings of Jesus Christ and light and all this stuff, but to seek out experiences that bring us closer to God because they make a difference and they turn us into the people that we're called to be. And they help us to remember that the same God that's up on there with us on the mountain is here with us right now in the valleys. Amen.